And so, some people might say, well, you dumbed it down a little bit. I did. I mean, Bitcoiners might read it and say, hey, you got a chapter on explaining Bitcoin. I don't need that. Fine, skip that chapter.
Right.
Early on, I had a test reader read it, and they got into like 2 chapters in. They said, what's the Federal Reserve? And that movie and book did extremely well because it told the story.
Yes.
It told the story of those guys. It showed, Michael Burry, staying up all night and getting the calls from his angry investors. You can build a big scale industrial economy, but guess what? If Hitler becomes your leader and decides he wants to take over Europe, you're going to see a lot of innocent people get killed.
Yes.
So having that scale economy is dangerous.
Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and enabling post notifications for more content on crypto and digital assets. Check out our other videos and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps with the YouTube algorithm and keeps the content coming. Thanks for your support. Enjoy the video.
The fundamental issue is the unsound money, not blue politics, red politics. It goes across all of that, and then I thought to myself, maybe I could do that because I'm older, experienced. I've seen how the country deteriorated. I've been in the sound money thing for a long time. But there are a lot of great Bitcoin books written. I'm not sure the world needs another one. And somebody on Twitter recently said, we just keep rewriting the Bitcoin standard. And to be honest with you, this has some of the Bitcoin standard in it. I fully credit Safe. That's the best Bitcoin book ever written. It always will be. Was the first, and et cetera. But I've given it to friends, and sometimes the reaction is it's a little too heavy, a little too textbooky, and they kind of get lost, and they don't necessarily finish it or even read all of it. I mean, those of us who are hardcore Austrian economy, we love it. All Bitcoiners love it. But and same with Lynn's book. Lynn's book's a brilliant book. It's fabulous. It's probably the best book on money ever written. But again, your normie doesn't read it. And so I thought to myself, maybe I can tell a tale, tell my story, because people like stories. I mean, the Bible's just, stories talking about narratives, and, they're messages in the stories, but they're stories, right? And people watch TV and they watch Netflix. They're watching stories. They don't watch, documentaries or, courses on something. And so, some people might say, well, you dumbed it down a little bit. I did. I mean, Bitcoiners might read it and say, hey, you got a chapter on explaining Bitcoin. I don't need that. Fine, skip that chapter.
Right.
Early on, I had a test reader read it, and they got into like 2 chapters in. They said, what's the Federal Reserve? And I said, okay. So I have a footnote, right? So we assume we know it, right? We've all read Edwin Griffin, but so I have a footnote, describing the Federal Reserve and how it works. And so I'm trying to write something. The goal of this book is to be a catch-all tool that you can give to somebody who does not know anything about Bitcoin, and they will come out and they'll be fully orange-pilled.
Wow.
Because they'll understand the history, and then they'll understand the solution.
Beautiful.
That's the goal.
And this is for a lay audience.
Absolutely.
Knows nothing about money, finance.
That's absolutely. I mean, trust me, I go deep enough into it. I don't just glaze over everything. I mean, I talk about, and there are a couple of chapters that I had some test readers say, boy, this is heavy. I started, the War of 1812 and how they stopped specie inflation chapter.
Yeah. So it's almost literal, basically, right? Like the system is addicted to easy money, which is this illusion that when there are economic problems that you can just print these pieces of paper to resolve it. But that's of course ass backwards, right? Like you actually have to produce more things to consume. You can't just stimulate consumption of that which has not been produced.
Efficiency is what gives greater well-being, not the printing of these units.
Yes, and there's it's deeply intuitive if you really stop and think about it. Like, if you're hungry and you're out of food, like, well, are you going to grow some food or are you going to print some paper? Like, which one's going to put food in your belly?
Right.
There's only one thing, and it's work, right? It's work, it's savings, investment.
Exactly.
Not the allocation of it through money, right? Money is just this allocation technology.
That's in there too. I mean, there's a great, story of just, growing eggs and fishing and sharing resources, and how savings is what creates better economic well-being and better economic outcomes.
Yes.
I mean, remember when Bernanke used to say, we have a saving get mentally tougher so that I could make it through to see Bitcoin evolve and survive. And I think putting in those personal parts to the story, makes it a little bit more interesting. I mean, it's funny. I mean, the title is very much, I mean, obviously those who know, this is a little bit of a playoff on The Big Short, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The big print,
same font.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and that movie and book did extremely well because it told the story.
Yes.
It told the story of those guys. It showed, Michael Burry, staying up all night and getting the calls from his angry investors and hitting the drums and knowing he was fundamentally right, but being kicked in the teeth. And the same thing happened to me, the exact same thing.
Yeah, and we've talked about this slightly before, but maybe it's worth rehashing a little bit. Like this is pre-Bitcoin, right? You're a gold bug. Yeah. You knew about the problems inside of the financial system. And
the early 80s until 2020. And, finally it broke. It massively broke because people realized that, that there was just 40% more money in the system.
Right.
And, wages, everything just went up. And of course, now, in my opinion, now we are in an inflationary age and we haven't been able to put that back into the can. And it's only going to get worse. And that's, you say earlier, you asked me, why did I write the book? The other reason, Robert, I really wrote the book was to try and help people. I mean, and to warn people, because I think it's an urgent warning. And one of my great fears when I wrote the book was that it wouldn't get out quick enough, that it would happen before the book got out.
Right.
Because I feel like this big print is coming.
Yeah.
And more inflation and more of the problem we're talking about, it's going to get worse. Okay. Yeah. As we talked about with the alcohol, you just keep drinking more and more. And so as a result of that, I really want to warn people, ability weightings on all the possible outcomes with respect to inflation. Wow. The crime, I think you're right. I mean, I think for the upper 10% of the country, they don't even notice what's going on. They're generally fiat based and doing pretty well. Yeah. I think for the bottom half of the country, everybody is really badly hurting. And even in the middle section, people are pretty badly hurting. And that's sad. I don't interact. I live in a pretty nice area. I don't interact with these people on a daily basis. I have a sister who lives in a rural area that's very middle class, and she tells me the stories, and I'm just horrified by how tough it is for a lot of these people. So, where's it going to go? I don't really know. I mean, the best case, I think, is that we would do a monetary reset of some type. And we would go back to sound money. I mean, if you want to kind of cut to the chase of the quick and correct solution, basically bought the economics profession.
Yes.
I mean, it's a protection racket. They pay all the monetary scholars to not criticize fiat.
Yes.
If you're an Austrian economist, you can't get a PhD level degree and get a seat as a professor.
Right.
Because you're going against the narrative.
Exactly.
I mean, it's so bad. It's so broken. It's so corrupt. It's interesting, though. I want to go back to a point you mentioned earlier, the crime thing. There's a part of the book that talks about this. I mean, inflation breaks societies. Inflation ruins societies. And I go through in a detailed way what happened in World War I. So the big inflations in the United States, there was one in 1812, that war, not that big. Civil War was big, really big. Greenbacks, a lot of inflation there. But calm down. We got back on the gold standard in the 1870s. The World War I was a seminal event. Okay, the Fed had just been formed in 1913. War broke out in 1916.
Yeah, what a coincidence.
We printed a ton of money to pay for the war. You can build a big scale industrial economy, but guess what? If Hitler becomes your leader and decides he wants to take over Europe, you're going to see a lot of innocent people get killed.
Yes.
So having that scale economy is dangerous.
Yeah, and he rose from the ashes of the Weimar hyperinflation.
Exactly. Yeah. Another perfect example of how inflation creates perverse outcomes.
Yeah.
Right?
So how do you because this it's again one of these things that's very obvious to Bitcoiners or monetary historians. It's a tenuous connection for people that are outside of the space.
Yeah.
How do you approach it? Like if you're talking to someone, obviously the book is a great approach, but if you can't get them to read the book, how do you elevator pitch people on this connection between money and everything else?
Great question. So my elevator pitch is, hey, you're hurting from inflation, right? There's nobody in this country that will argue with that today. Anyone who goes to a supermarket, unless you don't buy your own food, have that because the system doesn't allow us to have that because of the way it's set up. And then I start to go into the politics, and this is where the book differs from Lynn. Lynn came at it from an engineering perspective, it's brilliant, right? I come at it a little bit more from a political perspective, right? Look, I mean, Nixon had a choice. Everyone says, well, he had to go off the gold. No, he didn't. He could have just said, we're going to revalue gold higher. Now he would have had domestic inflation.
Sure.
but he could have let gold float.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And he chose not to.
Yeah.
And so the politics of the matter is, what's happened is the politicians and the big business people, the quintillionaires, the people who know how to make inflation work for them. I mean, the other thing in the book, the other chart in the book that I think is very important is the wealth distribution chart in the early going. I mean,
you know what page it is?
Yeah, it's right up front. It's under America's Broken. So yeah, if you go to in terms of salary, 5 times better or something. He was running a multinational corporation that was building cars all over the world.
Right.
I mean, there was a middle class in the olden days. And that was another reason for writing the book, that, some of the younger people in the Bitcoin sphere, I don't think understand just how nice and how good it was in this country in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, it wasn't perfect. There was a Vietnam War.
Yeah.
There were all kinds of problems. Okay.
Right.
And we didn't have the technologies we have today. I mean, technologically, today is miles away from then. I mean, it's just so fabulous. I mean, I was in college and I couldn't make long distance phone calls because they were too expensive.
Yeah.
I had a budget of I could call my parents once a week for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Because of the cost of a call. I mean, compare that to today, right?
Sure.
But in terms of kindness and themselves, and it costs the rest of us. And it's subtle and it's hard to understand, but let's take the 2008 bailout as an example. A lot of people have approached me and said, gosh, Larry, they had to do it. If they hadn't done it, the ATMs would have turned off, the banks would have failed. I mean, those guys were heroes. They saved us. And I'm like, no, they're not. And the book talks about an alternative approach that could have been used. But what they don't understand is, fine, okay, if you're going to have a system where you're going to bail people like that out, then don't complain when gasoline and groceries are more expensive.
Sure.
Because you bailed it out by creating, I mean, at a fundamental level, prices, reflect, supply and demand based in a unit of account, in the money, in the number of, money units and, monetary units, and technological advances we've had since the 70s, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we should all be working 40-hour work weeks or 20-hour work weeks and be fabulously rich.
Yeah.
But we're not, because we've wasted money on this stuff. I mean, that $8 trillion, I mean, if you've been to, I haven't been to China recently, but I have some friends who have, we should have high-speed trains here.
Yeah.
We should, insofar as we're going to have a large federal government that's going to do things, why doesn't it do things that are productive for us? I mean, why don't we have a nuclear, energy program going in the United States? You know, I mean, China is smart about this. They're doing it. I mean, if you look at all of the large advances, you do any study of this, and Saylor's laid it out brilliantly. If you look at all the large advances that have occurred in society, they occur because people get quantum jumps in how to develop power. Mm-hmm. Nuclear is that next step. And if Sorkin reads it, his head's going to explode. And because, that's the kind of channel I want to get onto. And what I just don't know, and we, I've got a really good book publisher, okay? Yeah. And she's ex Random House, and she came up with the idea for the title. I was talking about the big print in the book, and she said, no, this should be the title. And she was right. Mm. And I've said to her, can we get a major publishing house to do this? And she said, the Overton window hasn't shifted quite enough yet. Mm. They're still part of the establishment, Larry. Mm. Books are part of the establishment. Simon & Schuster, Random House, et cetera. She said, it's getting there. Yeah. And if you show big sales and, you might ultimately get there. Yeah. But we're not, she thinks we're not quite there yet. Is kind of her take on her. Mm. Can buy things before the prices go up. Yeah. So let's just take an example. New money comes into the system. The people who get that new money or have access to that credit or new money first are able to buy goods and services at the old price. Mm. And then that extra demand from that new money pushes those prices up, which the working man or woman has to absorb and pay, but they never got any of that new money. Right. So they're paying a higher price for that other man getting rich. Right.
Yeah. So it is an actual shell game, basically.
Putting away your savings year after year after year, right? And then suddenly this event comes along, and that 400 only has 250 of purchasing power because 40% of it just got taken away.
Because somebody pressed a button.
Somebody pressed a printing button.
It's crazy, right?
Right? And that's to put it in terms I think people can understand, that's what's going on. Yeah. And it's just so wrong. It's so sad and so unfair.
It is.
And that's why, somebody had to say something about it. I mean, somebody ought to write a book about this shit, right?
And you've done a great job.
And I did.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the book, I think it's as good. Trust is lost. If trust is lost, if I can't trust you to do something, you can't trust me to do something, then things don't get done.
Sure.
We all, and there's a certain level of honesty that exists in society. I mean, we all trust that airplane pilots are well-trained and understand the responsibility they hold, and they're responsible for hundreds of lives, and they're not going to drink, and they can't screw up, and they're going to do their job honestly, and that's essential. And the minute you start to fool with the money, and maybe even say that fooling with the money is okay, and maybe even say that gambling is okay, you introduce an entire different way of behaving that becomes, well, just how can I get the most that I can get? Or the book might resonate. I mean, I point out how, the game's not fair.
Yeah.
It's just not fair. And no wonder why people are pissed.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And you see that, I mean, with any game that humans play, right? If you can just arbitrarily change the rules if we're playing poker, and I get to decide what the hand rankings are every hand, it's like, well, I'm going to win every fucking hand.
Exactly.
And you're never going to want to play. Right. So there's no game. If the rules aren't immutable and stable, then there is no game. It becomes like a political struggle.
Not a fair game. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not even, it's not fair. And therefore it becomes not a game because the other player doesn't want to play it on
$5,000 and $10,000 and $400. I mean, I bought all my earlier seats, right? Okay, fine. And I'm done buying. Okay. It's $100,000 to you. Do you want a seat? Your choice. You say, no, I don't want a seat, or you can buy one. And it's just, the seats have gotten more expensive, no doubt. But if it is the Titanic, I think you want a seat on the lifeboat, Oh
yeah, buying seats on the lifeboat. Got it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, again, there's this illusion that people think, it's part of American exceptionalism, I guess. They just think the dollar is and always will be.
Yeah.
And I'm like, guys, open a fucking monetary history